It was Christmas Eve, 1965. NBC Studios in Burbank, California. Andy Williams was halfway through the Christmas song when he noticed something strange in the front row. A mother was holding her daughter, a tiny girl in a red velvet dress, and the child was crying. Not from joy, not from excitement, from fear. What Andy did next was never scripted, never rehearsed, and the cameras caught every second of it. 40 million Americans watched as Andy Williams stopped mid-verse and said 3 words that changed everything. But to understand why those 3 words mattered, you need to know what was happening in that little girl's life, and why her mother had brought her to that studio, against all odds, on that cold December night. By 1965, Andy Williams wasn't just a singer. He was America's living room. Every week, millions of families gathered around their television sets to watch the Andy Williams Show, a variety program that felt less like entertainment and more like an invitation into someone's home. And nobody did Christmas like Andy Williams. His Christmas specials had become a national tradition. The warm lighting, the gentle orchestrations, the way Andy seemed to look directly through the camera and into your soul when he sang Silent Night. For many Americans, Christmas didn't officially begin until Andy Williams told them it was the most wonderful time of the year. But what viewers didn't see was what happened behind the scenes. The pressure, the endless rehearsals, the sponsored demands, the network executives breathing down everyone's neck. December 23, 1965, the night before the live Christmas Eve broadcast. Andy was exhausted. He'd been rehearsing for 14 hours straight, and his voice was starting to show the strain. "Andy, you need to rest," his manager pleaded. "Tomorrow is the biggest broadcast of the year." But Andy couldn't sleep. Something was bothering him, a feeling he couldn't shake. He spent that night alone in his dressing room, going over the song list again and again. He had no idea that 800 miles away, in a small town in Nebraska, a woman named Dorothy Miller was making a decision that would change her daughter's life forever. Emily Miller was 5 years old, and she was terrified of everything. It had started 6 months earlier, when her father, a quiet, hard-working man named Robert, had been killed in an industrial accident at the meatpacking plant where he worked. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. Emily had been Daddy's girl. Robert Miller used to sing to her every night before bed. Always the same song, the Christmas song, which he'd learned from an Andy Williams record. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire. He'd sing it in his rough, untrained voice, and Emily would fall asleep feeling safe. After Robert died, Emily stopped sleeping. She stopped talking. She flinched at loud noises and cried at the sight of strangers. The doctors called it acute childhood trauma. Dorothy called it heartbreak. The only thing that seemed to calm Emily was music. Specifically, Andy Williams' voice on the radio. When Dorothy played Andy's Christmas album, something in Emily's eyes would soften. For a few minutes, she'd stop trembling. "It sounds like Daddy," Emily whispered one night. It was the first full sentence she'd spoken in months. Dorothy made a decision. She would take Emily to see Andy Williams perform live. She didn't know how. She didn't have money, but she would find a way. She wrote letters, dozens of them, to NBC, to Andy's management, to anyone who would listen. She explained Emily's situation, the trauma, the silence, the way Andy's voice was the only thing that reached her daughter anymore. Most letters went unanswered, but one didn't. 3 days before Christmas, Dorothy received a phone call. A producer at NBC had read her letter. There were 2 tickets waiting for her at the studio in Burbank, front row seats to Andy Williams' Christmas Eve special. Dorothy borrowed money from her sister. She put Emily in her best red velvet dress, and they boarded a Greyhound bus for the 36-hour journey to California. December 24, 1965, 7:47 p.m. Pacific Time. The NBC studio was electric with anticipation. The audience, mostly families in their Sunday best, had been seated for an hour. The orchestra was tuning. Technicians made final adjustments to the lighting. Dorothy and Emily sat in the front row, just 12 feet from where Andy would perform. Emily clutched her mother's hand so tightly that Dorothy's fingers went numb. "It's okay, sweetheart," Dorothy whispered. "You're going to hear the song, just like Daddy used to sing." But Emily wasn't okay. The lights were too bright. The crowd was too loud. Strange faces surrounded her on all sides. Her small body began to shake. When the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Andy Williams Christmas special," Emily started to cry. Not a whimper, not a sniffle. A deep, guttural sob that seemed to come from somewhere far inside her. Dorothy tried everything. She held Emily close. She covered her ears. She whispered reassurances. But nothing worked. Emily was spiraling into a panic attack, right there in the front row, as the biggest television broadcast of the year was about to begin. An usher approached. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to take your daughter outside. Please," Dorothy begged, tears streaming down her own face. "Please just give her a moment. She needs to hear him sing." "You don't understand. Ma'am, the show is starting. You need to leave." Andy Williams walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was wearing his signature cardigan sweater, his hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and inviting. The orchestra began the opening bars of the Christmas song. Andy stepped up to the microphone, chestnuts roasting on an open fire, and then he saw her, a little girl in a red velvet dress, sobbing uncontrollably in the front row. A mother desperately trying to comfort her. An usher reaching for the woman's arm. Andy kept singing. "Jack Frost nipping at your nose." But his eyes never left the little girl. Something about the scene pierced through the performance, through the lights, through the 40 million people watching at home. This wasn't a disruption. This was pain. Real pain. The kind that doesn't care about television schedules or sponsor obligations. Yuletide carols being sung by a choir. Andy made a decision. He stopped singing. The orchestra, confused, played on for another bar before stumbling to silence. The director, watching from the control room, nearly had a heart attack. What the hell is he doing? 40 million Americans watched as Andy Williams set down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. Andy knelt at the edge of the stage, his eyes level with the crying child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emily couldn't answer. She was crying too hard. Dorothy spoke instead, her voice breaking. "Her name is Emily. Please, I'm so sorry. Her father died. And your song, it was his song, and I thought..." Andy held up his hand gently, not to silence her, to reassure her. Then he looked at Emily and said 3 words that would become legendary. "Sing with me." The audience went silent. The control room went silent. 40 million living rooms across America went silent. Andy Williams, the biggest star in television, was kneeling on a stage, asking a traumatized 5-year-old to sing with him. Andy didn't wait for the orchestra. He didn't wait for permission from the director. He simply began to sing softly, gently, as if he were singing a lullaby to his own child. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire. His voice was barely above a whisper. The microphone, still sitting on its stand, didn't pick it up. Only the people in the first few rows could hear him. But Emily heard him, and something miraculous happened. She stopped crying. Her small body stopped shaking. Her eyes, red and swollen, focused on Andy's face. And then, impossibly beautifully, her lips began to move. "Jack Frost nipping at your nose." Her voice was tiny, fragile, barely audible, but it was there. Andy smiled. Not his television smile, but something deeper, something real, and kept singing. Yuletide carols being sung by a choir. Emily's voice grew slightly stronger. She was singing the words her father had sung to her, in the same melody her father had used. But now it was Andy Williams' voice guiding her. Dorothy collapsed into her seat, weeping openly. Around her, audience members began to cry. The usher who had tried to remove them stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. The orchestra conductor, a veteran of hundreds of broadcasts, did something unprecedented. Without being asked, he signaled for the strings to join in, softly, delicately, as if afraid to break the spell. The music swelled around Andy and Emily like a warm embrace. And so I'm offering this simple phrase. By now, Andy had climbed down from the stage entirely. He was sitting on the floor of the studio, cross-legged, at eye level with Emily. The cameras scrambled to adjust. The director had stopped panicking and started crying. To kids from 1 to 92, Emily was smiling now. For the first time since her father's death, she was smiling. Although it's been said many times, many ways, Andy reached out and took Emily's small hand in his. "Merry Christmas to you." The song ended. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody applauded. The silence was sacred. Then Andy did something else that wasn't in any script. He pulled Emily into a hug. A real hug, the kind you give someone you love, and whispered something in her ear. Years later, Emily would reveal what he said. "Your daddy is so proud of you, and so am I." The audience erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper. A collective release of emotion that seemed to shake the walls of the studio. People were standing, crying, holding each other. The director, wiping his eyes, made another unprecedented decision. He kept the cameras rolling. Andy spent the next 20 minutes with Emily and Dorothy. He introduced them to the orchestra. He showed Emily his dressing room. He gave her his sweater, the famous cardigan he'd been wearing during the broadcast, and helped her put it on, laughing as the sleeves hung past her fingertips. "You keep this," he told her. "And whenever you're scared, you put it on and remember, you're braver than you know." The 1965 Christmas Eve broadcast became the most watched program of that year. But it wasn't the songs people remembered. It wasn't the celebrity guests or the spectacular production numbers. It was 4 minutes of unscripted humanity. A man choosing compassion over performance. A little girl finding her voice again. Emily Miller grew up to become a music therapist, dedicating her life to helping traumatized children through the healing power of song. She wore Andy's cardigan to her college graduation. She wore it to her wedding. She wore it the day she opened her own therapy center in Nebraska, the Robert Miller Center for Musical Healing, named after her father. Andy Williams and Dorothy Miller stayed in touch for years. Every Christmas, without fail, Andy would call Emily personally to sing the Christmas song to her over the phone. When Andy was asked about that night in interviews, he always deflected the praise. "I didn't do anything special," he said once, in a 1987 interview. "I just saw a little girl who needed someone to listen. That's all any of us really need, isn't it? Someone to listen. Someone to sing with us when we're scared." Emily was in the audience at Andy's Moon River Theater in Branson in 2011, the night he announced he had bladder cancer. She was wearing his cardigan. After the show, she went backstage. Andy was tired, thinner than she remembered, his voice weaker. But when he saw her, his face lit up. "Emily," he said, "my brave girl." They sang the Christmas song together one last time. Andy Williams died on September 25, 2012. He was 84 years old. Emily Miller was among the mourners at his memorial service. She spoke briefly, her voice steady and clear. 47 years ago, she said, "a stranger stopped his show for me. He taught me that kindness matters more than schedules, that compassion matters more than perfection, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply sing with someone who's scared." She paused, clutching the cardigan, now faded and worn, but still precious. "Merry Christmas, Andy. Your daddy would be so proud of you too." The story of Andy Williams and Emily Miller reminds us that sometimes the most powerful moments aren't planned. They happen when we choose to see the person in front of us. Not the audience, not the cameras, not the expectations, just the person. Andy Williams could have ignored that crying child. He could have let security remove her and continued with his perfect, polished performance. 40 million people would never have known the difference. Instead, he chose to stop, to kneel, to sing. And in doing so, he gave a grieving little girl her voice back. He gave 40 million viewers a memory they'd never forget. And he gave all of us a reminder of what Christmas, what humanity is really about. If the story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness changed your life? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And don't forget to ring that notification bell, because we've got more incredible true stories about the legends who remind us what really matters. Merry Christmas. And thank you, Andy, for everything.